Hi, everybody. It's Monday. It's 1 o'clock, and it's time once again for Pirkei Avot, History and Hashkafa, brought to you in the framework of the ongoing lectures and shiurim of the Tel Aviv International Synagogue under the aegis of Rabbi Ariel Constantine. I have pre-recorded this year today for the simple reason that I am in the middle of making preparations for a trip to the United States, where I am going to have the privilege of marrying off my oldest son. So this is not coming live. I will upload this at the appropriate time tomorrow. I hope there will be a shir, in fact, the following Monday. I will do the best I can to make sure that that happens. Okay, so we are talking about. We started the 13th Mishnah in the third chapter of Pirkei Avot. It's attributed to Rabbi Akiva. It begins of a series of comments by Rabbi Akiva. Last week we spoke about Rabbi Akiva and his life and his teachings and so on. And he starts off, interestingly, with a series of preventative actions. In other words, why this is the opening Mishnah is something of a riddle. Various people explain it different ways, but let's not go off to speculation. He starts by giving us a list of things which one should try to do or try to avoid in order to be able to protect something else. So, for example, he starts with, and that's what we're going to discuss today, Schok v'kalut rosh margilim la'avera. Lightheadedness, I'm going to translate it like exactly. Playfulness and lightheadedness lead to sexual impropriety or worse. Masaret siag Torah. Tradition is a fence around the Torah. It's going to take us a long time to try to parse. Maasrot siag osher. If you give your tithes on time, I think we would say that tzedakah would would sort of fill this bill. Is a fence around wealth. Nidarim, vows are a fence around or a protective agency for abstinence. Let's talk about that too. Sag lechochma shtika. The best way to protect one's wisdom is silence. I had a brother-in-law, Zichron Livracha. He unfortunately passed away very young. He used to always say, better to be thought a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt. Anyways, that's not what the Mishnah is saying. We will get to that. Let's start with this. I think the hardest one to address. Schok v'kalut rosh margilim la'avera. Laughter, playfulness, and lightheadedness or frivolity lead to or accustom a person or get a person in a situation where he will commit sexual improprieties. Erva are the most serious of all sexual encounters. They are listed twice actually in the Torah. Once at the end of Parshat Achremot, once at the end of Parshat Kedoshim. But in general, the use of erva is used to denote all forms of sexual impropriety. So let's define our terms here because they're not really clear. Number one, the Torah is not against enjoying life. Okay, the world is here to be enjoyed, and playfulness per se. Humor per se is not a bad thing. On the contrary, it's a good thing. The Gemara talks about various kinds of jesters and people who would make people laugh, and that they have a special place in the world to come. Games are certainly encouraged as a pastime. So schok does not necessarily, and schok can mean games, and schok can mean all kinds of things. What we're talking about here is frivolity in the sense of activities which have a sexual overtone to them, because they open the door to inappropriate activities. Would that include flirting? May very well. In fact, there's a lot of reason to think that's one of the possibilities, because there's a Gemara in Brachas that describes a very strange story, that Rav Kahana, who was a student of Rav, who was the first, so in other words, the second generation Amora in Babylonia, was a student of Rav, who founded, together with Shmuel, the Torah Center in Babylonia, or brought it to its first, he didn't found it, but he brought it to its really first great crescendo in the generation after Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, in the early first half of the 3rd century, that he hid under Rav's bed, and he wanted to get some sex education. So he heard that Rav was with his wife, Desach v'sachak v'asa maaseh, that he seduced her with words. He spoke to her. V'sachak clearly means foreplay, or foreplay, and then they had relations. And Rav realized that Rav Kahana was under the bed, and he said, "Kahana, ad kan hayasta panecha barabcha." You're such a mechutzef. You're so daring. How can you be so I don't know how to say it. So absolutely inappropriate as to be in my bedroom with my wife. And Kahana answered, Rebbe, Torah hi v'lilmod ani tzarich. It's Torah, and it's also Torah, and something I need to learn. You can do a lot with this story, and I'm really not, and a lot of people have. I'm not going to go into it, but the point is that the word sachak clearly means actions of an overtly sexual nature, and that would no doubt include flirting. It would no doubt include perhaps inappropriate touching, even if it's volitional, even if it's done. With the excitement, it's not a Me Too situation. Nevertheless, it's not acceptable, because one thing leads to another. There is, as they used to say, there is a how's the phrase go? There is a Midron Chalaklak. I'm forgetting how to say this. There is a slippery slope. And it's always a debate about what the angle of the slope is. In any event, the kalut rosh is frivolity, lack of control, and that can mean a lot of things also. But it really comes down to kalut rosh comes to losing track of yourself. Now, what does that mean? Kalut rosh can mean going into inappropriate speech. Getting carried away, and when you have a kind of when you're in a social situation, you can easily get carried away, and getting carried away is one thing does in fact lead to another. In fact, the more that you're in company with the Kalud Rosh or with another person, the easier it is to get past yourself and to do something later you might very well regret. So that it doesn't mean that fun is usser per se, and play is usser per se. It's a contextual thing. So, for example, there is a powerful statement of that Chazal make. They notice that the parsha, that the discussion of the adulterer's wife in the book of Bamidbar, Parshat Naso, precedes the discussion of the Nazarite, who's mostly well known for not drinking wine and letting his hair grow. And the Gemara says, why are those two parshiot next to each other? And that is because kol haroeh sota bekil kula yazir et atzmo min hayayin. A person who sees the horrific degradation of the adulterous wife, and possibly the death of the husband or the death of the lover, will sort of freak out, and he won't drink wine at all. Now that's an extreme situation, and the rabbis are quite conflicted about, in general, whether one really should become a nazir or not, whether one should take upon oneself that kind of restriction, because in general, for example, Maimonides says that one of the reasons why the Nazir brings a sin offering at the end of his period of Nazirite is because he has sinned by the very action of keeping away from the world, from not enjoying wine. And don't forget, and I think I've mentioned this a number of times, wine was the major beverage of, I mean, so I always have a bottle of, Pepsi Max here or something like that, right? Where are we? You see, but or Cola Zero, but one was what they had, and one was a source of joy. Yairi Samak Lavav Enosh. God created wine to be able to make people happy. There's no isser to be. There's no prohibition against being happy, but this person sort of freaks out and sees the extreme of where over inappropriateness and frivolity and losing control can lead, and therefore it's always, I don't want wine at all. So an extreme situation leads to extreme reaction. But the point is the same, that you have to be able, that in general, what Rabbi Akiva is driving at in this Mishnah, is to be aware of temptation, is to be aware that you are responsible, that people are vulnerable, and that people are subject to temptation to do things that they're going to regret later, and which will be, in fact, sins. Now, how you understand that really, it's interesting. The commentaries there's a broad range of attitudes towards that very statement. You have among the commentaries those who are very sort of dour and Puritan, that say the best thing to do is to just stay away from any situation which could possibly get you into any kind of trouble. And others say no, you have to learn how to balance being in company and enjoying the company of other people by setting clear limits. It's one of the reasons why there are prohibitions against yichud, because people are people. It's not a bad thing. It's just an awareness of where one can in fact come to sin. Now that raises another issue. I was thinking about this a lot in Yom Kippur for obvious reasons. In our contemporary society, it often seems to me that the concept and the severity of the idea of sin against God and sin against others, certainly sin against God, it's not as imminent a religious reality for many of us. When we make mistakes, we are ready to forgive ourselves. This is aided and abetted by a general tendency to against moralizing. It's interesting. We are very forgiving of people who sin or people who commit crimes. Whereas the Torah says you go and steal from somebody, or you go and, God forbid, kill somebody, then you have to be punished. You've committed a sin. You have sin against God and against sin against man. In our culture, and this is a point which is made out beautifully, it's not the easiest book to read, but I really recommend it. In two books by the late Philip Reif, one of them is called The Triumph of the Therapeutic, and the other one is called My Life Among the Deathworks, which is a very, I know it's a very sort of dark title. In any event, that, we sort of forgive ourselves. Well, so-and-so did it because he had a hard childhood and this and that and the other thing, or I in general wasn't watching, or I made I don't know, whatever that people can always find all kinds of reasons to justify their own actions. And Rabbi Akiva is here saying you don't be so forgiving of yourself. You have to, first of all, if you do something wrong, then you have to fess up and you have to pay. You have to take responsibility for it. And at the same time, you should avoid it, and don't be so self-forgiving. Now, the truth of the matter is that. The truth of the matter is that when one discusses this kind of issue, in contemporary terms, how shall I put this? How in fact to interact in a situation which is potentially has potential sexual overtones is somewhat problematic for a religious individual, for example. So, give you an example. It is widely it is widely accepted as a practice among Orthodox Jews that men and women don't shake hands, because so that's where the line was. That's where the line was set. Um, Now, in general culture, that is considered to be very. It's offensive. So how do you parse that? I have no answers. I'm just pointing out the problem. Similarly, in the wake, not in the wake, there in the wake of Me Too, for example, I remember reading that the then Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence, only went out to dinner with women with whom he had a business meeting, so with his wife there. And I remember the press making a whole make fun of it. And it's not right, and on and on and on. But the truth of the matter is that this is very much in the context of Rabbi Akiva. That one should be aware of one's weaknesses, and one should and everybody has to know themselves, and that's not just a Jewish thing. That's you know, that was Socrates' famous slogan. The unexamined life is not worth living, and know, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. Now, as it happens, and where you might be weak and where you might be strong, because at the end of the day, you have to a person is obliged to make a report to account for their actions between those who are close to them and also before God. So, but it's not an easy thing, because the rules of the game of the world in which we live don't work that way. And create awkward circumstances. I think I haven't provided any answers. I'm just trying to highlight the issues here. I do want to point out that Rabbi Akiva and Chazal were very much aware of the libidinous nature of people. We don't need Freud to know that how many things are overladen with sexual or with sexual overtones, and that a religious person is obligated not to abjure the world, but to also be very much aware of not only how they act, but also of how their actions are taken. That's another part of the story, because as I've often said, we are not only responsible for our bodies and we also do not own our lives or our bodies, but also our good names. There's an explicit expression in the Torah, "V'yitim nekiyim Hashem Yisrael." When you act, you must do it in such a way that not only is there you raise no suspicion in God's eyes, and God knows all, but also in the eyes of other people, because that can lead to Chilul Hashem, or just because you're not supposed to besmirch your own capacity. And with this we'll close. One of the motifs, I think, that's consistent in all of the commentaries here is the fact that harks back actually to the opening comment of the Rabbi Moshe Isserlis to the Shulchan Aruch. He quotes actually a passage from the God for the Perplexed Open Quantities, and he says, just try to always remember that wherever you go and whatever you do, God is there with you. And that should be, encouraging, but it also can help to put a damper on doing something that you may very well or could very well regret later. And that's how you live a holy existence. Nachmanides, when I leave with them with this, Nachmanides has the famous comment, the famous concept of of the definition of kedusha, that a person can totally observe the Torah and still sort of miss the point. You can drink kosher wine all day long, but if that leads you to act badly, then you didn't do anything right. Right? On the contrary, you have violated the spirit of the law, and that also exists. So that balancing one's own desire to enjoy the world and balancing the need for fun and the need for recreation with knowing what the context is. In certain contexts, you have to restrain yourself because we know one's own weakness. That is what Rabbi Akiva is inveighing against and cautioning against when he says, if you get too much into certain modes of behavior, then there will be a price, and it will lead you places you are absolutely not interested in going, certainly not afterwards. All right, that will end today's discussion. The next sections are easier, and we will see you hopefully next week. Bye.